Hey, welcome to Q&A, where you ask your questions on faith and life, and I do my best to give a biblical perspective. Hey, we've got a question that I think is going to come up for us again and again in terms of some of our discussions in the midst of community with our friends and everything else as we get closer and closer to that fateful day when we cast our vote. So let's jump into today's question. With the election coming up in New Zealand, I'm finding myself confused. I'm told Labour and Greens are all focused on the marginalised in society, but then I see their policies and they are not God-honouring. Aren't we meant to look after the needy, not the government? How should we vote? Hey, and this is a big question. There's so much in here that we can't do it justice in the time frames that we try and keep within in terms of Q&A. Aren't we meant to look after the needy, not the government? I'd want to say both. We're called to do what we can. We're called to attend to the individual situations when we can and do what we can to help people at their point of need. But governments are called to work at a bigger picture, to create policies, to enact legislation, to provide resources at a higher level to try and alleviate and address some of the drivers of poverty. But it's something that we shouldn't say it's the government's job. We shouldn't say it's the church job. We should say it's all of us working together that is going to make the difference. Really, the question is, how should we vote? Can I just say that before I share some thoughts on it, is that one of the things I think we need to recognise as Christians here in New Zealand is that we shouldn't see politics as the primary answer to the problems that we face as a nation. Politics is not going to change it. Replacing one government with another is not fundamentally going to change the problems we face. The problems we face aren't simply economic or social or anything like that. They're deeper than that. They are issues that arise out of living in a broken world, and we should be looking to God and to redeem these, because God alone is able to redeem. So we should be praying for our nation. We should be living and working in ways that bring His kingdom to bear, rather than seeking to look to a government to do it. Having said that, we also need to recognize that God said that He will redeem nations, change them through two means. One is the church and the other is the government. So we shouldn't be looking to the government as the solution, but we shouldn't minimize their role either. God gives them very real responsibilities. And so it means that when we vote, we shouldn't be voting along party lines. We should be looking at politics in terms of, so how does my faith shape the way that I see the direction of the country in ways that are going to benefit us all? I think if we're just voting along party lines, and if you do, please hear me, I'm not condemning you, but I think if you just vote on party lines, if you've always voted for this party and that's what you do, if you're a Christian, you're not voting out of faith. You're voting out of politics. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I just want you to own it. Because if you're a person of faith, you cannot say, therefore, this is the party I'm going to vote for. And that's what I'm always going to vote for, because no party is honouring of God currently. No party truly embraces the agenda of God in these days. There's no party that its policies are fully aligned. In fact, if you vote for the left, some of their policies you could rightly say are aligned with the agenda of God, but some of them are majorly at opposition with God. So you can't say, therefore, as a Christian, I'm going to vote for them, because you need to recognize, no, they're at odds with God. Equally on the right, it's the same scenario. So all I'm saying is, don't vote on party lines if you want to vote with integrity as a Christian. I think you need to be voting for along the lines of who is seeking the common good, who is seeking the welfare of everybody as best they can, rather than their own agenda, rather than particular policies, particular ideologies, particular party lines. The reason I say that is in Jeremiah 29 verse 7, God spoke through Jeremiah to say, seek the welfare of the city, because in its welfare you'll find your own. And he's writing to a group of exiles, a group of people who are in exile in Babylon. Babylon represents everything that's the opposite of God and His kingdom, everything that's the opposite of Israel. So today we would see that as the world. And he's saying, seek the welfare of the nation in which you find yourself, because even though it doesn't share my values, even though it doesn't reflect my kingdom, if it's seeking the welfare of everybody, you will be taken care of within that. And so when I'm voting as a Christian, I'm going to look at key policies and see how do these line up with Scripture, and how are these seeking the common good, the welfare of everybody. Because if there's alignment in those directions, then it's going to be beneficial for us as a nation, and it means that God is able to work in ways that are going to bring about His kingdom purposes more naturally for us as a nation, rather than anything else. So for me, in light of current political issues, I'm going to look at parties' policies around things like abortion and euthanasia, right to life, because these are high up there with God. These have to do with the welfare of our nation, the common good, because at either end of the spectrum, abortion, euthanasia, it's people who have who cannot speak for themselves. And so we need to be saying, well, how do we uphold their voice? How do we uphold their well-being? What does the Bible have to say about that? Again, in our current environment, social environment here in our nation, I'm looking at political parties' stance on criminal justice, not social justice, but criminal justice, because the Bible has a lot to say about that. So I'm going to look at parties' policies on this, and which direction is it going? So it's going to influence how I vote. Immigration is another issue that I'm going to survey political parties' policies on, because in the Bible it refers to them as aliens, but it has a lot to say about them and how they should be treated and all those sorts of things. So where is the party's policies? Which direction is it going in around that issue? I'm going to look at a big issue is sexuality, gender, and I would want to include in their human rights, because sexuality and gender are really an expression of human rights. It's a total package, and the Bible has a lot to say about that, because really, if we're made as Christians, if we believe we're made in the image of God and God has created us male and female and all those sorts of things, we should be our social policies around that should be seeking to protect men and women, and to enhance us to find expression of that in its fullest way possible, in ways that don't infringe upon others. And so in ways that the Bible, that's the antithesis of the Bible. So, for example, the Bible has a lot to say about protecting women, and yet I'm hearing so many women say that, I feel threatened in some bathrooms, for example, because men are coming in. So I'm going to look at those sorts of issues. You're going to have your own view on that. I'm saying what shapes me. A big issue for me is the environment. The Bible has a lot to say about what it means to be a steward of creation. And so I'm going to look at what is the party's views on this. How does it seek to steward creation and the resources that have been entrusted unto us for our benefit and for our care, not for our exploitation? I'm going to look at issues of poverty. Poverty is not a new issue. Jesus said the poor will always be with you. But that's not an excuse to marginalize them, to ignore them, to exploit them. He says, therefore you care for them. And the Bible's full of how we're to do that and what that looks like, and some principles. So I'm going to look at parties' policies and what direction are they going in this regard. Again, racism and social division. The Bible has a lot to say about that. Not about we collapse one another into this sort of common melting pot, but how we esteem and affirm one another in ways that bring unity, not division, that respect one another. So I'm going to look at what a party's policies are in this regard. Now, I want to be upfront. I'm not looking for correspondence. I'm looking at the direction, because the Bible, when you look at the Bible, the direction of these sorts of issues is for the welfare of all. It's for the common good. And so if the policies of a party are going in that direction, then it's going to shape the welfare for the common good. And if the party's policies are not aligned with that, then it's going to bring division. It's going to bring something else. And so therefore it's not for the common good. And so that, again, that's going to shape how I vote. So in regards to your question around how should we vote, that's what shapes how I vote. As a Christian, I'm not going to vote along party lines. I just don't do that. I don't see how you can do that with integrity anymore. There may have been a time when you could have done that, but not now, because a party's policies will never line up with Scripture in their entirety. So you can't say, as a Christian, I'm going to vote for, because you got to say, as a Christian, this is the party I'm going for these reasons, and recognize that, and that no party lines up. You're going to have your criteria. You're going to have what shapes your vote. So I'd love to hear from you. Why not post a comment down below, and let's encourage one another. But as always, you can ask your questions on Faith and Life on slido.com. Use the hashtag ALC23. But until next time, God bless.